So this slide for the non-maritime and marine and offshore economies, people out there, this slide could be probably the worst place to start, right? Because I'm asking the question, why is it so difficult to innovate in this space, right? So, okay, so let me back up here real quick. So strategic foresight has basically three functions inside of an organization or in a consortium. The first one is to kind of set a vision of where are we going as an organization, right? What does the future look like? And then can we define and describe that vision of the future, right? And then can we communicate that vision to the future to the people that we work with, and can we share that, right? So we have some kind of common orientation. Right. The second one that we have is strategy development. Obviously, how is it that we're going to compete for the future, right? How is it that we're going to say continuously evolve our organization and push the boundaries of what we can do, right, to provide more value to our customers. And the third role or function of strategic foresight is very much innovation, right? So what is it, and how will the innovations of the future then impact the organizations that we work with, right, and the regions that we work with, right? And how can we then prepare for those innovations and use them to our advantage? So those are what I would say are the three kind of outcomes of strategic foresight. But why is blue growth so difficult? Let's move back forward now. So why is this a difficult place to innovate in? So today is a lot about innovation, right? And the first thing I'm going to say is that there's a lack of infrastructure, right? Especially when we're trying to innovate offshore. There's a lot of things onshore that we take for granted, right? Electricity, connectivity, accessibility, right? These kinds of things on land, right, are very much available and useful, and they're so available and useful that we forget about them, that they only come in to be a bigger problem when we're in a spot offshore, right, or out to sea. The second reason that this is a difficult space to innovate in is because we've got harsh weather and sea state conditions, right? There's no protection from the wind or the waves, right? It's all out there and it's all exposed, right? The third reason, right, is that there are additional engineering challenges when it comes to structures offshore, right? You've got special considerations that need to be taken into account, for example, with vibration, right? Because machines and power plants that are embedded into the ground, right, they're going to vibrate differently than if they're, say, on a floating platform, right? And then you've got large problems with corrosion. So there was a book written a few years ago about rust, right? Oxidation of metal, right? And they say that this has been probably the largest enemy of the American military than any other element or adversary, right? So if you haven't figured this out by now, that I'm American, right? But I've been in Scandinavia for probably since 2005 anyway, 16 years. So you'll hear a lot of American kind of origin stories in strategic foresight coming through because, anyway, we'll get there. Another challenge, right? The vastness of the seas, right? Mentioning this, right? So transfer, logistics, right? Getting reliable sources out there, like planning for periodic supply, right? Resupplies, right? Just makes it another challenge. And then we've got institutional and legislative dialogue necessary in this kind of space, right? So the negotiations, the planning, and the collaboration amongst these different countries and actors have to come together and agree on how we're going to use this sea space, right? And then finally, we've got the public perception of the fragile ecosystem, right? And so what happens is that there is this kind of sense, and it's permeating the EU right now. If you look at the EU right now, there's a big focus, for example, on plastics, like plastic in the sea, right? There's a big, whenever there's an oil spill offshore, it makes the news right? And it seems to circulate in the news for a lot longer than you'll get if there's a problem on land, right? So there is this public perception of the fragility of the ocean ecosystem that's also at stake. And when you take these things together, right, we've got a major challenge in maritime, offshore, ocean economies, whatever you want to call them. Maybe we just call them ocean industries. That we have delays in innovation, right? So there's about a, more or less, depends on the technology, but there'll be something like a 10-year time gap between when we see things implemented on land and when they finally move out to the sea, right? So there is this, and it also makes the industries and a lot of the major actors, we'll call them focal firms, it makes them very quite conservative in the sense that they're not willing to take a lot of risks because they know that if they take one risk, right, all 6 of these conditions kind of have to be kind of taken into account, right? So the investments that are required to perform innovation in the ocean industries, right, is quite significantly, and it requires a lot more planning. And so strategic foresight's really a quite interesting tool, and that's why it's matured and pushed so far in this domain. It's because of those kinds of challenges and the need for this kind of long-term cycle of planning.